Columbus Day is just around the corner, but how much do people really know about the discovery of America? Watters World hit the streets to find out.
History tells us Columbus discovered America. A neat beginning, never meant to be questioned. But that story was never the beginning. In Oregon, buried deep in the earth, scientists have unearthed something older and far more unsettling. A clue that shakes the foundations of everything we know and has experienced researchers questioning everything they were taught. This discovery threatens to rewrite the origin of humanity itself, revealing lineages and paths we were never told existed. Debunking the ancient models. For most of the 20th century, archaeologists believed they had solved the mystery of who first came to North America. Their answer was the Clovis people, named after a site in New Mexico where their distinct stone tools were first uncovered. They were skilled hunters who crafted fluted projectile points, spear tips with a groove running down the center that made them lighter and deadlier. According to the timeline that dominated classrooms and textbooks for decades, the Clovis people arrived in America around 13,000 years ago. They crossed a land bridge from Asia into Alaska, moved south through an ice-free corridor, and spread across the continent. But while this story is widely accepted, new discoveries have challenged this theory. The first crack in the Clovis story appeared in a small rock shelter tucked into the hills of western Pennsylvania. Meadowcroft Rock Shelter sat on the banks of a small stream about 7 miles upstream from the Ohio River. With its overhanging sandstone ledges, one archaeologist later described it as having all the attractions of a prehistoric holiday inn. It was the kind of place where people would naturally want to spend the night, sheltered from rain and wind and close to water. But no one paid much attention to this location until 1955, when a local historian named Albert Miller noticed something strange in a groundhog hole on the land. He reached in and pulled out ancient-looking artifacts that did not belong there. Even at that, nearly 20 years passed before professional archaeologists took the site seriously. In 1973, a scientist named Jim Adavasio began digging into the floor of that rock shelter, layer by layer, sifting through dirt that had accumulated over thousands of years. What he found would make him one of the most controversial figures in American archaeology. The deeper he dug, the older the evidence became. And when the radiocarbon dates came back from the labs, the numbers were shocking. Humans had visited Meadowcroft as early as around 16,000 to 19,000 calibrated calendar years ago, several thousand years before the Clovis people were supposed to have arrived. In July 1980, Adavasio published his findings in the journal American Antiquity, one of the most respected publications in the field. His paper boldly claimed that the Clovis first model, the theory that had been taught for generations, was wrong. The reaction from the archaeological community was swift and fierce. Many refused to believe it. Some questioned the radiocarbon dates, arguing that ancient coal deposits or groundwater contamination might have made the samples appear older than they really were. Others simply ignored the evidence, clinging to the timeline they had spent their careers defending. Researchers coined a term for this resistance. They called it Clovis primacy syndrome, and they described its continued maintenance as both anachronistic and futile, meaning it belonged to an earlier time and was ultimately pointless to defend. Even today, the scientific community remains divided. One poll of archaeologists found that only 38% agreed with Adavasio's dates, while another 38% were unsure. The remaining 20+% still rejected the findings outright. The main criticism centered on whether the earliest plant remains used for dating were accurate, a technical debate that has dragged on for decades. But while archaeologists were fighting over whether humans arrived 12,000 years ago or 16,000 years ago, a discovery was waiting in Oregon that would make all of those numbers seem small. This discovery did not just challenge the timeline, it shattered it. And what they found there was so strange, so deeply ancient, that even the scientists who uncovered it struggled to believe their own eyes. The bombshell discovery that changed everything. While archaeologists argued over Meadowcroft and debated the meaning of its dates, a different discovery was waiting in the dry caves of south-central Oregon, popularly known as the Paisley Caves. This cave had been known to scientists for decades, but no one had looked closely enough or dug deep enough. And when researchers finally did, what they found would force the entire field of archaeology to confront a question it had been avoiding for years. Were the Clovis people really the first, or had someone else come before them? Someone whose story had been buried beneath layers of ash and dust, waiting for the right technology to bring it back to light. The evidence that broke the case open was something most archaeologists never expected. They found preserved human feces, dried and hardened over thousands of years, sitting in the dirt where someone had left them long ago. And inside those unassuming chunks of ancient waste was something that stone tools could never provide: human DNA. When the scientists extracted mitochondrial DNA from the samples and sequenced it, the results were unmistakable. The genetic material corresponded to Native American founding haplogroups A, 2, and B2. This means the people who left these remains were direct ancestors of modern indigenous peoples of the Americas, not a different group that went extinct or a failed migration that left no descendants. Real, actual relatives of the people who live in North America today. They had been there much earlier than the Clovis people. The dating method used to determine the timeline was accelerator mass spectrometry, a technique that allows scientists to measure the age of organic material directly without relying on nearby objects or surrounding layers. When the lab results came back, the numbers were staggering. Once calibrated, the fossilized feces dated to over 14,000 years before the present, placing it at least 1,000 years earlier than the currently accepted dates for the Clovis complex. The Clovis people were not the first. They were not even close to first. But the Paisley Caves discovery was only the beginning. About 70 miles away, outside the small town of Riley in Harney County, another site was slowly revealing its secrets. Rimrock Draw Rock Shelter had been under excavation since 2011, led by University of Oregon archaeologist Dr. Patrick O'Grady. Unlike the Paisley Caves, which had yielded ancient DNA, Rimrock Draw was giving up stone tools, animal bones, and a clear, unmistakable timeline written in volcanic ash. The most important clue at Rimrock Draw was a layer of white ash sitting in the ground like a marker. Scientists identified it as ash from a specific eruption of Mount St. Helens, dated to about 15,400 to 15,600 years ago. This strongly suggested that everything below that ash layer was older than 15,000 years, while everything above it was younger. It was a natural clock, baked into the ground by a volcano that had erupted more than 1,000 miles away. Below that ash layer, the team started uncovering evidence that would leave them stunned. Researchers uncovered roughly 27 tooth enamel fragments. Not much to look at, but enough to identify exactly what they came from. One belonged to yesterday's camel, a species that once roamed the continent during the last ice age. Another matched Bison antiquus, a larger, heavier ancestor of today's buffalo. Both species had been gone for for thousands of years. Yet here they were, buried in the same place, beneath the ash layer. Whatever happened at Rimrock Draw, it happened a very long time ago, and it left behind just enough evidence to prove it. Researchers also found a stone tool in the same layer, made from orange chalcedony, a kind of agate that catches the light. It had multiple working edges, a curved cutting edge, a flat scraping edge, and a saw-toothed edge worn down from heavy use. Patrick O'Grady later compared it to an early Swiss Army knife. The teeth on its edge were almost smooth, polished by repeated use. Whoever owned it had relied on it for a long time before it ended up in the rock shelter. Where it was found raised even bigger questions. The tool sat about 10 centimeters below the camel tooth fragments, meaning it was older than the animal remains. And those remains, once tested, turned out to be far older than expected. Multiple tests confirmed the same result. The camel and bison remains dated to roughly 21,000 to 22,000 years ago, placing them deep in the last ice age, far earlier than anyone had anticipated. O'Grady later admitted that it was extremely scary having a single date of material that is that old. You do not want to announce something that old without having something to back it up. But now, he had two samples, two independent tests, and two identical results. The camel and bison that died at Rimrock Draw lived more than 18,000 years ago, and the stone tool found beneath their teeth suggested they could be older still. The stone tools found at Rimrock Draw fit into a category scientists call the Western-stemmed tradition. These are distinct projectile points with long blades, weak shoulders, and rounded bases. They look nothing like Clovis points. They were made by different hands, following different traditions, likely coming from different places, and they predate notched points by thousands of years. Whoever made these tools was not Clovis. They were something else entirely, something older that does not fit neatly into any of the old theories. By the time the Rimrock Draw findings were published, the Clovis first model was already on life support. Paisley Caves had dealt it a serious blow, but the Rimrock Draw discovery was much worse. But even that wasn't the limit, because researchers soon discovered that Rimrock Draw was not even the oldest or most controversial site in Oregon. Because while Patrick O'Grady was carefully digging through the rock shelter, trying to confirm his dates and publish his findings, other researchers were working on sites that would push the timeline back even further. Sites that would take the story from 18,000 years ago to 20,000 and, eventually, numbers so large that even the scientists who uncovered them struggled to believe their own interpretations. Discoveries that broke the timeline. Just when archaeologists thought the story could not get stranger, two discoveries emerged that did not just challenge the old timeline, they smashed it completely. One came from a dry lake bed in New Mexico, while the other came from a freeway construction site in California, where bones and stones pointed to a human presence so old that most scientists still refuse to discuss it. The first discovery happened at White Sands National Park, a vast stretch of white gypsum dunes in New Mexico. In 2009, researchers began finding human footprints preserved in ancient lake beds. Not just one or two, but 61 fossilized tracks left by people walking along the shore of an Ice Age lake called Lake Otero. The prints were clear enough to see individual toes and the arch of a foot. These were trails left by groups of people, including children, moving through a landscape that has long since turned to dust. The first attempt to date the footprints came in 2021. Scientists used radiocarbon dating on seeds from a plant called spiral ditchgrass, found in the same sediment layers as the footprints. The results came back between 21,000 and 23,000 years old. This was already a problem for the Clovis first model, but skeptics raised a concern. They claimed that the seeds could absorb carbon from groundwater, which would then make them appear thousands of years older than they really are. 2 years later, researchers checked the findings using a different method. This time, they analyzed conifer pollen from the same layers. Unlike other materials, pollen isn't affected by carbon from groundwater. It comes directly from trees that were alive when the footprints were made. The results confirmed the original dates, between 21,000 and 23,000 years ago. In June 2025, a third study, published in Science Advances, looked at organic material from wetland mud and shallow lake sediments. This time, 3 separate sources were now tested: pollen, seeds, and organic mud, yet all pointed to the same period, the height of the last ice age, when conditions were at their harshest. The human footprints at White Sands are found alongside footprints of Columbian mammoths and giant ground sloths, massive creatures that disappeared thousands of years ago. Their tracks cross the same ground, preserved together in the fossil record. But as shocking as White Sands was, it is nothing compared to what was found in the Serutti Mastodon site, located in Southern California. This site was discovered during routine freeway construction when workers uncovered bones buried deep beneath the surface. When paleontologists arrived, they realized they were looking at the remains of a single mastodon, an elephant-like creature that went extinct at the end of the Ice Age. But the bones were not just lying there naturally. Something had been done to them. The mastodon bones displayed spiral fractures, a distinctive type of breakage that occurs only when bone is still fresh and green. Fossilized bone does not break this way. Someone had broken these bones on purpose, likely to get at the marrow inside. Scattered among the bones were 5 large cobbles, fist-sized rocks that did not belong in the surrounding soil. Geologists determined these stones were too large and too heavy to have been carried there by water. Someone had brought them to the site. Someone had used them as hammerstones and anvils. The dating method used to test the bone specimens was uranium-thorium radiometric analysis, and the result was consistent across every test. The bones were around 130,700 years ago. The study, published in the journal Nature in 2017, made a bold claim that shocked the archaeology community. The site showed that some kind of human species was in North America at that time. Not modern humans or Neanderthals, something unidentified. The mainstream archaeological community has largely avoided engaging with this site. It is too radical and too hard to explain. Who were these people who came to America so early, and where did they come from? For decades, the answer seemed to be Siberia, but new evidence from genetics and stone tools is pointing somewhere else entirely. Somewhere that has forced scientists to rethink everything they thought they knew about the people of the Americas. Did Native Americans come from China? History claims that the first American population walked from Asia into North America across a land bridge called Beringia, the only way in. But new discoveries are forcing scientists to ask a different question. What if some of the first Americans did not walk at all? What if they came by boat? And what if the place they launched from was not Siberia, but somewhere much farther south, like coastal China? The first clue that early humans knew how to cross open water came from an island in the Mediterranean Sea called Crete. Crete has been an island for about 5 million years. It has never been connected to the mainland during the entire time humans have existed. This means any person who ever set foot on Crete had to get there by boat, not a raft drifting by accident. A real boat, built with purpose, capable of crossing at least 40 miles of open sea. Researchers led by Thomas Strasser and Eleni Panagopoulou found stone tools at 2 sites on Crete. The tools were not new. They were between 130,000 and 700,000 years old. The tools looked like those made by Homo heidelbergensis or Homo erectus, early human ancestors that lived long before modern humans existed. If those ancient people could build boats and cross the Mediterranean, then the old idea that early humans could not navigate open water was dead. One member of the research team put it this way: if early humans could move around the Mediterranean before 130,000 years ago, they could cross other bodies of water as well. He said the discovery would open the door to re-evaluating every assumption made about early human migrations. Even genetics added to the complication. Researchers studying a mitochondrial DNA lineage called D4H traced its origin back to northern coastal China. But instead of showing a single migration route into the Americas, the lineage appears to have arrived through 2 separate pathways. The first wave came about 26,000 years ago. These people may have traveled along the coastline, likely by boat, hugging the shore from China up through Japan and across the Pacific. They did not cross the land bridge. They had boats, and they used them to move from one coastal camp to the next, following the food and the tides. The second wave came about 15,000 years ago. These people took the land route, crossing the Bering Land Bridge. They are often associated with later migration waves connected to Clovis-era populations, the stone tool makers that archaeologists once thought were the first Americans. Now, it seems they were not first at all. They were latecomers, following a path that earlier migrants had already traveled. Supporting this idea is the fact that similar stone tool techniques have been found across China, Japan, and the Americas. The same ways of shaping stone, the same kinds of blades and points appear in all 3 places. This was not a coincidence. It was a trail, and it leads back to coastal China. But what do you think? Did the first Americans come from a single migration from China? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more updates.